Hey, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, the play by play announcer for Big Ten Saturday on NBC Sports, as well as calling games for the NFL, NBA, overseas basketball, and so much more. Let's welcome Noah Eagle to the show. Noah, thanks for coming on and welcome.
Chase, thanks for having me. First of all, I mean, anytime that I can be on something that has cool sports involved, I already feel great. So you're a bonus and all of that. It's an honor just to join the show, and I appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming on. I appreciate that compliment. I really do. Was listening or watching, I should say, your game on Saturday with Oregon Ohio State. What a crazy game that was, especially with the quarterback sliding down with no time left.
Yeah, Will Howard is, I would say, going to be staying up late at night, kind of remembering that at least for the foreseeable
Yeah.
future. I'm not all that concerned about the Buckeyes moving forward this season. I think they've got an outstanding team, outstanding coaching staff, and so I expect them to bounce back and have a great finish of the year. But I think that anytime you go into this profession or anytime you grow up a big sports fan, you dream of calling games like that. And so getting a chance to actually do it and have one that truly does come down to the final play and truly was a back and forth affair. 7 lead changes doesn't happen very often in football. So to be there for it was pretty cool. And the Autzen Stadium fans certainly delivered their end of the bargain.
So you mentioned before the episode how you also called the game in the playoffs where Dax kind of slid down right with with little time left, and they weren't able to get the playoff. Another one of the biggest moments, kind of prime time moments in the NFL or football in general over these last few years. We had Kenny Albert on, and he talked about how he has like the no hitter curse, like he can't make it to a no hitter. Do you think you have like the quarterback like sliding down curse whenever you're in these close game situations?
Chase, my dad has done many, many games, and you've talked to him. He's done many games in which coaches have been fired the next day. So part of me thinks he's got a coach curse in some respects. I've had actually 2 games already where a football coach has gotten fired the next day. One was 2 years ago, Scott Frost's last game as the head coach of Nebraska. They lost to Georgia Southern. And the other one was Nathaniel Hackett's last game as the coach of the Broncos. I did that game on Nickelodeon as well. So I don't know if it's the QB sliding thing or if I'm Coach Killer 2.0, but that's not necessarily the reputation that I'm looking to have around the industry or around the sports world. So hopefully, as of now, I'm just going to look at it as coincidence. And hopefully, any quarterbacks that are watching right now, they agree. I have nothing against you, nothing against your team. I'm here to see good football, and I am not any sort of weird slide man. That's not what I do.
It's not what you do. What you actually do is doing an incredible job as a play-by-play announcer. We're going to talk about how your dad is also doing this. He's doing it at a high level, kind of what that meant. And these questions will kind of, that question about your dad will kind of come into this. But let's break down, right? When did you realize this is what you wanted to do, and what has been your career path since to get to where you are now?
Chase, I'd say that it was probably around 13, I would say, is when I lasered in on this. I think growing up as a sports fan, the first choice is always to play sports forever. And so being a pro athlete was probably where my head was at for a long time of I'm going to go to Duke or Syracuse or wherever, Kansas, and then I'm going to go into the NBA and I'm going to be a superstar for many years and I'm going to be good. I'm ready to go. And that's just not the case. I'm vertically challenged. I'm probably athletically challenged in some respects. And so
I'll
when
join
that's
you there.
yeah, when that's kind of the hand that you've been dealt, you've got to adjust and call that audible. And so for me, the audible was pretty easily in front of my face where I saw my dad doing this every day. And there was a moment in time, and people can see it online if you look me up because it's now been reported and I've talked about it a bunch. But when I was young, I would say I wanted to be a TV dentist, which is definitely a fake thing that I created in my head. It was combining Dr. Phil and dentistry and then realizing that nobody wants to sit at home on a Wednesday and watch as a crown gets installed on Tim from Timbuktu. Nobody needs that. That's not good for business and that's not good for personal. So
That's
I
true.
left that in the rear view. And I think about 13 years old, this is what I wanted to do. And then from there, I didn't do much, honestly. I went through school, I did my thing. My senior year of high school, I was the morning announcements guy at my school. So that was probably about as extensive as it got for me. I knew in the back of my head and I would pay attention and I would go with my dad a lot to games and I would watch. I would really observe, see how he handled himself, see how he interacted with people, see what he did leading up to the games, see how he handled on cameras, whatever else. And I just took mental note of anything that I could. And then when I eventually decided on school, I went to Syracuse, and that's really where I immersed myself with everything. And from day one all the way until I graduated, it was full steam ahead.
Your dad also went to Syracuse. You mentioned your dad in that kind of introduction to what you've done in your career. You've already done so much at 27, and we're definitely going to get to that. But you mentioned your dad. For most people who know, he's been on this podcast, one of the most legendary announcers in history doing the NFL, college basketball, the NBA. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you listening to this, know Ian, and that is obviously your father. Outside of just watching him and having, I guess you could say, like his talent, like in the family, was there anything that he told you or that he did for you personally that really helped get yourself ready to become a sports broadcaster?
Of course, I think that a lot of people have this image in their head that there was once I decided I was going to do this, or once I got to college or something, there was just a day where he sat me down in his office and said, "Here's how you do it: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6." And that's just not the case. I mean, that's unrealistic to expect of
Right.
anybody. This is such a nuanced career and a nuanced life that it does require you doing it and making those mistakes and then learning how to correct them. I do think that one of the best things, and this was something that he thought was going to be important for me, was not doing a ton of stuff before I got to college and almost being somewhat of a blank slate, a completely new canvas, because now you can outline and then color in instead of having a poor outline done and maybe coloring outside the lines early. It was completely ready and blank, and everything was there. So I definitely just jumped into the deep end. He gave me advice along the way before I got to school of just really how to enjoy school and what things to get involved with. I think that was the first step for him was, okay, now you're here, you're a freshman, you got to get involved with just about everything. But I would start here, I would prioritize this and then start to add this and start to add that. And so that's what I did. I listened. I was always very much willing to listen to anything anybody told me. I just felt like it was the best time for me to gather as much information as possible, put it into practice, and then use that practice over time. So anything that he gave me, I used, and that continues all the way into the current part of my career and my life. I mean, that goes for broadcasting and outside of broadcasting.
Right.
Everything I do, I look to him for some form of advice, some form of direction, and he is always there. And the best thing that I'd say he did in his approach was he never forced anything on me. He never told me, hey, you need to do it this way or that way. He really let me try it and go and try to figure things out on my own. And then when I felt it was time, I would go to him and I would have questions and he would have answers. And that similarly is still how we do it. So he's always there when I need him. And it's been a great resource for me to have along the way.
That's great to hear. When your dad did come on the podcast, one of the main observations or one of the main things that I took from it that I noticed was that your dad still writes out his game notes to prepare for the game on paper, which I thought was really not happening anymore. But I've actually spoken to a few other play-by-play announcers since, and that's actually how they do it. I mean, it's shocking to me whenever I do this, I do it on the computer. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting. One of the things he mentioned is how that is very different from some of the other play-by-play announcers. How are your techniques and preparation and all of that different from your father and everyone else kind of in the industry?
Yeah, what you're trying to say is he's a dinosaur, which I remind him of on a daily basis. I say you refuse to come to the modern day. You refuse to really blend in
Yeah,
with the rest of the broadcasting world. But I get it. You've got a system, and to your point, you've done this now, so you know how important it is to have a routine and to be comfortable with what you're looking at and to know where to locate things very quickly. And so I do mostly computer stuff now. Football is a complete blend. I've got half of it that's typed notes, and then I leave a number of space, a lot of space within that to fill things in with handwritten notes. That's just the way for me to do it. It's the way that's been the most
interesting.
efficient, and it's gotten in here in my head the quickest that way. You know, I've got a pretty good memory. That's something I got from my dad for sure. And I know if I write something down once, I've got a pretty good memory to have it. But if I write something down a couple times, it's in there and I know exactly where it is. And so I can color code it with pens, I can highlight it, and that allows me to find things very quickly. So I've got a system on football. Basketball, it is 75, 80, 85% computer based, where I type it all up from scratch. Every team that I do, it's all the stats, all the background information, anything that I might need is on there. And then I leave a little bit of space at the bottom and on the front and the back so I can write some extra notes on game day. If I talk to a coach or a player, I can jot something down. So it's not an exact science. It's something that I'm continuously finding ways to sharpen,
Right.
finding ways to make more efficient, finding ways to make more useful. But that's, I think, the name of the game with the entire profession. Even my on-air performance, I'm never going to be a finished product. And if I am, then I should retire. And so that goes for how I prepare for the games as well.
You mentioned how you always ask your dad, like, join us with this more modern style. And something that I find interesting is I think the advancements in how broadcasts are run for the play by play booth, but mainly just when it comes to technological advancements as well, has been key. You went out Super Bowl 58 for Nickelodeon, where like cartoons were like communicating on there. And like, that's awesome. And like, that's the world we live in now with analytics and technology. And I think it just changes the game, completely. What are your thoughts around this new style? Because you grew up watching your dad with the very, I guess you could say, older style now, which was
Yeah.
very, basic. They used to not even have like the scoreboard up the whole game, and now the advancements has just changed the game completely. What are your thoughts around that compared to what you grew up watching?
Yeah, I think I think the Nickelodeon broadcasts are actually a really good example of we have these advancements. We have different ways of doing things with virtual reality and augmented reality and different ways for people to view games and to experience events. And I think all that stuff is great. But I do think at the end of the day, when it gets down to broadcasting a game for real and not an alternate broadcast, not a secondary screen, just when you are sitting down and you've got the biggest game, you have the Super Bowl for real on a network. So let's say Super Bowl's on NBC, and one day they say, Noah, you're going to go call the Super Bowl on NBC. The same principles apply to what we've always had. The way that
Right.
you call the game is still going to be the way that you call the game. And the best thing that I learned at Syracuse, and this is something that's been passed down for generations from the great Marty Glickman, who was basically the first in the long line, the first domino in the long line of Syracuse broadcasting
Right.
lineage. What he said and what he told because he became a broadcasting coach, what he told everybody after that was always to consider the listener. And if you're on TV, consider the viewer. What do they need? What is most important for them? And that's what we should still be providing above all else. It's great to have the bells and whistles. It's great that we have all this new technology and we've got all this new stuff that is at our disposal and how we can provide entertaining content. But at the end, you still want to make sure you're doing justice by the audience. You still want to make sure you're doing justice by the athletes on the field or the court. And so, as long as you're doing that, I think you're going to be doing a good job. Now, for those alternate broadcasts, and that's really where we're in this kind of new area and the new era of broadcasting. And I've had a chance now to do the Nickelodeon for the last 4 years. We've done 5 games. It's been unbelievable. I
Right.
think that it helps reach a brand new audience. And that's really the goal of that. So the principle stays the same. My consider the listener or consider the viewer is just a different viewer or listener than what I'm going to have on a quote
Interesting.
unquote
Yeah.
traditional broadcast. And so that's really what this new technology allows for us. It broadens and widens our reach. And I think that's a good thing just for the overall state of sports.
We talked about the advancements in what broadcasting is as a whole, but then you kind of transitioned it into what you do so well and how you make your job easier for kind of, and then that side as well, and just make sure that you do the fundamentals no matter what else is the case. You've achieved so much at such a young age. It's incredible. 27 years old. You've already been the radio play by play announcer for the Clippers. You've worked at the Olympics. We're going to talk about all this. What would you attribute the success to? Because it's very rare that people can have this many opportunities at 27 like you have.
Well, I think you're well on your way. I can tell you that much. I mean, you're what, 14 now?
13, yeah.
13. All right. So I'm aging you up already. And don't let anybody do that. Try to keep your age. I had been getting aged down for a while, that somebody must have gotten my age wrong on Wikipedia for a good year and a half. So people thought I was a year younger, which was great in some respects and not great in other respects. But I'll take it. They've gotten it right now. I'm 27. That is correct. And I would tell you the answer to your question is a lot of it is timing and circumstance and just being fortunate in how things have worked out, because that's really how this goes in a lot of ways. There's no singular path for everybody to take. You can't just look at it and say, okay, I'm just going to do this, 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 and this, and then I become a great network broadcaster. That's just unfortunately not how it works. It's not like being a doctor or a lawyer or so many of the other jobs that you see a lot of people take, and they are great things to do. They're great lives to live, but it's just different. You don't go to medical school, you don't go to law school, and then you don't move into the next stage and the next stage and then eventually reach the pinnacle. It is all based on what's available and how people view you, which is hard. It's not an objective thing. Excuse me. It's not an objective profession. It's very subjective. And so I've just gotten really lucky that when I graduated Syracuse, the Clippers job, it was the TV job that was opening up, and they interviewed me for it. And then they eventually decided to move the radio guy up to TV. And they liked me in the interview and said, you know what, you should just take the radio position. So I said, great. And it was the first, and that's always the hardest one, Chase, is that first one to get,
Right.
because now somebody's taking a chance on you. Now the subsequent chances that are being taken are less of a threat to their own credibility. They are less difficult to make because somebody else has already done it for you in some way.
It kind of
So
reminds
because
me
I
of
got,
it kind of reminds me of LinkedIn in a sense. Like when you connect with one person, it's going to help you get the next. Like when you
no
get
doubt,
that first job, it's going to help you get any other opportunity. But to get that first job to show people that you are at that caliber, I think is definitely the hardest. Yeah.
it adds you to that web. It's very simple. And so again, I'll use the domino thing, that once that first domino falls, then the other ones can start to follow it. But if that first one just stays standing up, then there's nothing that the other ones can do until somebody knocks it over. And so I just got very lucky in the timing of it, that I happen to be graduating that year, that I happen to have a professor who recommended me for the job, that they happen to like my stuff, that I happen to do well in the interview, and then we go from there. But to me, once you get that first opportunity, it's all about you from that point on. It is, how do you handle yourself? Do you do well in it? Do you perform well? How do you treat the people around you? And then are you just always keeping yourself available for whatever comes your way? And I'm not saying going and seeking things out, but always just being ready when something does come your way. So I have the Clippers, and then Nickelodeon comes calling, and they said, you know what, there's this young guy, here he is, and we think he could be a good option. I was just one of 3 people that they interviewed for that position. And I just happened to be the only one that grew up watching Nickelodeon and was quoting their shows and doing impressions of their characters on the interview. And they said, we got to have this kid. And then from that point on, other things came, and then other things came. And it's eventually led me to the position I'm in now. But I think it's that first one. And again, timing and circumstance for every step along the way. And I've been really lucky in that sense.
It actually reminds me of, or not reminds me, it's very interesting how, they hired you straight out of college with not a ton of experience, but also, very ready for that job. The Clippers, they also just did the same thing with Carlo Jimenez, the new
Yeah.
radio voice. I just find it very funny. Maybe they're going for that direction of let's get someone youthful in here. I find that incredible. You've had so much success and you've been able to announce so many big games. One of the more memorable ones, I know you announced the Minnesota Vikings comeback over the Indianapolis Colts. What a crazy game that was a few years ago. Obviously, I'm sure that game will be up there, but what have been some of the craziest games that you've announced and some of the best moments as an announcer so far in the booth?
No doubt. That one's high. And I mean, it's the largest comeback in NFL history, 33 points. The Vikings were down 33-0 at halftime. And I think we thought that game was over. And so to be there for that was pretty special. I would say, in my time with the Clippers, they had a lot of crazy comebacks, including Game 6 against Utah to send themselves to the conference finals for the first time in franchise history. They were down 25 points in the third quarter of that game and found a way to win. And that was the first game with a full capacity crowd since before COVID. And so it was so loud in there. It was so loud to the point that a lot of the ushers and people who work in that arena constantly said it was the loudest they had heard that building since Kobe's final game, which was pretty incredible to hear. And then the next year, the Clippers actually were in DC playing the Wizards, and they were down 35 points in that one and came back to win. So those
Oh
were
my
crazy.
gosh. See,
Yeah.
no, I'm a Wizards fan. I have a side podcast about the Wizards. You're really making me sick. Actually, I'm gonna jump in here. The funny part about that story is I ended up getting like this really bad sickness. It was like the flu that week, and that was the start. And I swear I was about to like get better, and then I watched this game, and I swear it like got me worse. Like I got more sick after that, delayed my recovery time. That really was a crazy game. Luke Kennard, if I can remember correctly,
You
had
are correct.
yeah.
Luke Kennard 4-point play in the final seconds to put them up what I think might have been the first time in the game. And the crazy thing was that season the Clippers were playing without Kawhi Leonard the whole year. Paul George
Right.
missed, I think, 60 games about that year, close to it. And I think he played 31. So he missed 51 games. And they still went 42-40, which was a testament to Tyronn Lue and his coaching ability. And they actually traded for Norman Powell late in that season at the deadline.
Huge deal, yeah.
He played 3 games. He got hurt. So they had nobody essentially of what they expected. And Reggie Jackson and Ivica Zubats, they had Isaiah Hartenstein. It was a really gritty team. Terrence Mann, Amir Coffey, all those guys really played their hearts out. So that was kind of the pinnacle in terms of the crazy comebacks. They had 5, I think, that year of 25 points or more, which was an NBA record in a single season. So I got to call a lot of crazy games with them. And then this year, this past year, last year we had Notre Dame, Ohio State, which was a 17, I think it was 17-14, the final score.
Another
It
crazy
was
game, yeah.
basically, yeah, walk-off touchdown. And then you just mentioned the game I just called last weekend, Oregon, Ohio State is pretty remarkable. And then all of the Olympic games, but especially the 3 of the last 4 days. And I've got the Paris stuff on right now. I like
Love
to
it, love it.
keep it on just to remind myself of what happened a couple months ago. But getting to do the U.S. men and women and U.S. semifinal against Serbia was insane, down 17 coming back. And then the gold medal game against France for both the men and women. I mean, the women, especially Gabby Williams, has her foot on the line, and she thought she had a chance to tie the game, which she obviously did. And instead, they lose by 1. The U.S. wins another gold medal. So those will all rank pretty high. And my dad said the same thing when I talked to him after the Vikings Colts game, which was the 33-0 comeback, and then both the Serbia and France men's and women's games. He said you could call football and basketball for 40 years and you'll never get games like those. So hopefully you enjoyed yourself. I go, yeah, they were pretty good.
You know, I feel like just in my experience with announcing, even just like middle school basketball teams and stuff, sometimes these games are complete blowouts and you have to find things to say to fill time. Are there
Yeah.
times though, because on the radio I have to talk a lot, like are there times where you still can't transition fully away from just focusing on the game? Because sometimes when it's a blowout, good or bad for your team, you kind of have to move along and talk about different things and more storytelling. Is there a point though, like obviously that 35-point comeback where you can't move away from that? You really have to stick with the game in case a crazy comeback happens?
So those moments definitely teach you not to give up on games entirely and to just keep yourself engaged to a certain degree. But I do think the more you do it, and obviously I got 4 years of doing radio and I did it by myself. I didn't have an analyst with me. And so it was up to me to create, to cultivate any of those types of moments and to keep people entertained, especially in Los Angeles. I don't know how much time you've gotten to spend out there so far in your life, but I can tell you this: the traffic in LA is no joke. And so we got a lot of people who are on their way home for work, especially for those games on the East Coast, because they would start at 4 or 4:30 Pacific time. And so by the time it was the third, fourth quarter, people are sitting bumper to bumper traffic trying to get home. So I always had in the back of my mind, okay, you've got to keep this entertaining for people who are just trying to pass the time, because I've been on the other side of that behind the wheel where I've been frustrated trying to get back to my apartment. And what was on? A basketball game. Okay, let me turn that on and hear how this sounds and see if they can keep me, locked in to a certain degree. So the best thing for me was that because I did 4 years, I really learned how to find that balance. And I think by the time I was done, I had a great sense of when to shift into that mode, into that quote unquote fill mode, and when to get back to the game. And it's a balancing act, but it definitely comes with the reps. And the more you get, the easier it is.
My dad has a saying for me, just get your at bats in. Like in baseball, you're going to have your cold stretches. Find a
Exactly.
way to bat 270, find a way to bat 275. Just get your at bats in, and eventually you're going to find that consistency. And I think that's kind of how you mentioned it there, 4 years doing that. And you really found that balance. And now kind of going on throughout your career, you're going to be looking back and say, wow, I did that at 27. The more and more experience you get, the more and more you're going to improve. I think one of the
1000%.
biggest. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think it is perfectly said, and the better way of kind of exemplifying that is it's not just understanding those moments, but then in the big moments as well. I just feel like early when I was starting, I had a sense you go off instincts, but now once you do it one time, two times, three times, four times, by the fifth time you feel better. By the 10th time you feel even better. And then by the 100th time, it should be second nature. But as I said before, that doesn't then stop once you feel comfortable. There's
Right.
always a way to get more comfortable, to get more polished, to get a little bit more refined. Whatever you can do, even if it's 1% better, always try to do it.
I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest opportunity you've received yet in your career, you mentioned it, was announcing the basketball games in Paris for the 2024 Olympics. And you obviously you did an incredible job, like you do in all your opportunities. But not only that, but it was just it had a lot of hype, right? The U.S. men's team was getting like best team of all time hype. You had that
Yeah.
comeback against Serbia. Just so many things that went into that. Just break down overall what that experience was, because that's not something many people get to have. And also, Dwayne Wade was your analyst. Like, what an
Yeah.
experience that was.
It was incredible. And I think that I don't want to say there was a level of trepidation, but there was something there right as I was getting ready to leave because I just didn't really know what to expect. I knew that I love calling basketball games. I knew that basketball has always been a passion of mine in the NBA. And I get to call, to your point, this incredible team, this team that has all timers and has different eras laced on it, where you've got LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry, the quote unquote OGs, and these guys that I grew up watching and idolizing and being in awe of from a young age all the way until now. You have that middle generation with Anthony Davis and Joel Embiid and Drew Holiday and Derek White and so on and so forth. And then you've got this next wave, the new wave of Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker and Bam Adebayo and all of these guys, Tyrese Halliburton. So I love the sense that I got to call their games. It was really, really cool that I got to call their games, period. And then the women, it was another all-time team for them. And to get to be there to call Diana Taurasi's final Olympics and another gold
Right.
medal, if she sets the record for most gold medals in a basketball competition, that's pretty spectacular in its own right. So I already knew it was going to be great. But when I got there and I saw how excited Dwayne was to do it, and he had never called a game before, and we did a practice the day before our first real game action, and we sat down. We did I think a half of a game from the previous year, or maybe it was it was one of the U.S. exhibition games against Australia. We did
Yeah.
half of it, and we got up, and I go, "Oh, this is going to be great. He's going to do really, really well, and he's only going to get better as we go." And so we sat down day one. It was the toughest day for him because he had the Greek names that he had to get, which is brutal. I mean, you've got Giannis is one thing, but to then have Toliopoulos and Harampopoulos and Papagiannis and Kostas Papanikolaou all on the same team at the same time for a guy who's never called a game full sit down live before, and he crushed it. So we were having such a blast doing the games. It was basically just two guys hanging out, having fun watching basketball. And the same with LaChina Robinson, who is one of easily the best broadcasters, period, in the business. She's an elite host and she's an outstanding analyst. And I just was really thankful I got to work with her and got to work with Kareth Burke, our first sideline reporter, Zora Stevenson, who's awesome as well, and our second sideline reporter. So we had a great crew overall. And boy, did those games deliver, man. I did not in my wildest dreams think that we would have games at that level. I don't know if we expected, we knew that it was going to be a challenge for the U.S. I don't think we thought it was going to be that level of challenge for both teams. I mean, the U.S. women were expected to run through the competition, and they had a scare in the first week in Lille, where they played a Belgium team that was really talented with one of the best players in the world in Emma Miesemann. And then, boy, that gold medal game was different. It was
Yeah.
something special, and it was the final event of the entire Olympic Games. So to say that you got to do the final event of the Olympic Games and it ended in such dramatic fashion is pretty cool.
I gotta ask you because on this show and on the channel for the longtime viewers, you guys don't understand, or if you listen to me throughout the summer, I was one of the rare Americans. I'm sure people hate on me for it that actually picked against the U.S. at the beginning of the Olympics. I thought France was going to do. I just thought that something wasn't going to work. And during that Serbia game, I was always cheering for the U.S., but I'm like, maybe this is that moment. But I just think it was so magical how like Steph Curry struggling throughout the whole tournament, and like my one thing was like, how are you going to handle having so many players? It's just one person's going to step up every game. That was the eventual answer. And to
Yep.
watch that whole thing happen was incredible. But I'm sure I'll still get some backlash for picking against US. But
Well, here's
anyway,
the
I
thing
wanted
though,
to get
Chase. Here's the thing. Ask all those same people who their picks are for 2028, and I'd imagine you're going to start getting some different answers.
right. Yeah, we'll see. Because obviously, I'm sure LeBron, Curry, and Durant won't be back. So we'll see what happens. Maybe you'll be doing that. You never really know. But you've already accomplished so much in your career. Is there something you haven't done yet that you're like, wow, I want to do that at some point?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I think a lot of people always just assume, oh, you've got to have one thing that you got to do, right? And my answer really is no. There's no dream scenario, dream job for me where if I don't do that, I'm going to feel like I never reached where I needed to. I've already done so much to your point where I'm already super thankful for the experiences I've gotten to have. Now, if you're sitting here and saying, "Hey, would you like to do the NBA Finals one day?" Of course, I'm a huge NBA fan. Would you like to call a Super Bowl that doesn't have slime in it? No doubt, I would love to do that as well. But I've been so lucky in so many ways. I mean, I got to do Roland Garros this year. I'm a big tennis fan and grew up a big tennis guy. And so I got to work with Tennis Channel for the last 5+ years. And then I got to call it on NBC this year. Like that was really cool. And I grew up a huge Rafa Nadal fan. And I got to call what sounds like is going to be his final match at that
Right.
tournament, a tournament that he owned his entire career. So just getting any opportunities as they come my way are all great. So I can't just call out one thing and say I got to do it, but anything that does come my way, I'll be excited for.
I gotta say, and I don't know how much you could touch on it. Rumors have said that Netflix has been looking at you and Ian for a possible job. Can you touch on that, or if that experience would be cool, or anything along those lines?
I'm sure it would be awesome, but we'll see how everything shakes out. That's all I'll say.
All right, that's what we'll get, and we will see once we reach that Christmas time. Those games, my Ravens play the Texans, Chiefs play the Steelers. It'll be a lot of fun. Noah Eagle, this has also been a lot of fun. Hearing about your stories and your accomplishments has been incredible. You probably have heard it from your dad. I ask this to every single person I interview. You have to give one key piece of advice on becoming
Hmm.
a sports broadcaster. What would it be and why?
I would say the best piece of advice I would give is trust your instincts because the second you start second guessing your instincts is how mistakes start getting made. And I think that was a lesson I learned pretty quickly through college was if I just do what I feel in the moment, good things tend to happen. And with that, I just know that instinctually I'm more of a risk taking type person. They're calculated risks and they're not risks that are going to necessarily get me in trouble, but they're maybe things that other people wouldn't say or do. And so I knew that my instincts told me that they were okay. And I followed that and it's gotten me to this place. So I would always say the most important thing in this entire job is trust your instincts and let them guide you.
Noah Eagle, thank you so much for joining us today, talking about your career. You've already done so much. You'll continue to do so much more. And we look forward to watching that journey. Noah, thank you so much.
Chase, thank you for having me. We'll do it again at some point soon. And I'm looking forward to your own journey. It's going to be a special one moving forward.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. We've now completed. I don't know if we need to have someone else on the Eagle family, but we basically kind of
We'll get
completed
my
the
sister Erin. She'll get the alert. We'll make it happen.
let's do it. Let's do it. Noah, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it. For the viewers who enjoyed this, thank you guys so much for viewing alongside one of the best play-by-play announcers in the country, in Noah Eagle. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.